Hello, virtual pilots. iFlyFlightSims here. Welcome to the channel. Do you have a VR headset, and are you wondering how to get the best possible performance with it in Falcon BMS 4.38.1? Well, I'd like to show you all exactly how I maintain a stable 72 FPS in most situations, which will give you the smoothest possible performance while balancing visual quality. In this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into optimizing VR performance in Falcon BMS as we go over the settings I currently have in the NVIDIA app, the PimaxPlay app, Falcon BMS, and OpenXR Toolkit. Currently, my setup includes an NVIDIA RTX 5080 GPU, an i7 14700K processor, and 96GB of DDR5 RAM. You can find my complete setup information in the video description. Now before we get started, I just want to send out a thank you to Pimax for sending me a Pimax Crystal Super QLED VR headset for free so I could make this video. This headset gives you a phenomenal 106 degrees field of view, and the QLED panels with a resolution of 3840 by 3840 per eye really makes the cockpit details pop out. Now this headset is an excellent way to immediately level up your VR experience in BMS Falcon 4.38. I also want to let all of you watching this video know that you can receive a discount on your Pimax purchase by clicking on one of the affiliate links in the video comments or description and entering the discount code shown at checkout. I receive a small commission on those purchases, and this is one way you can support my channel. Now let's get started. We'll begin by going over what you need to know to get started with VR in Falcon BMS. Now when you are first getting started with VR in Falcon BMS, I highly recommend that you review the documentation that's provided with the game before you make any changes to your settings or your configuration files. Now the developers have done an excellent job with providing documentation for this game, so we're going to go over to the docs folder, and once we have that open, we're going to open the BMS manuals folder, and here we can find the BMS Technical Manual, so we're going to open that up. Now the BMS Technical Manual includes a description of each of the graphics settings in the game and the impact on FPS. We're going to start with this FPS Quest section here, which has a description of how BMS 4.38 is significantly different from prior iterations of BMS, as well as the different settings in the game's config.exe and the FPS impact of those settings, and some recommendations on how you can improve your FPS. Now, Section 3 includes the config files and describes what each of those config files do, as well as some description of each of the settings that you can enable or disable within those config files. So this gives you all you need to know about config files. Moving on, we're going to open the BMS VR technical guide, and that is found under this Input Devices folder and the VR guide folder. So we're going to go ahead and open that one up. And as you can see here, the VR guide contains all the information you need to know to get started in VR in BMS. So not only does it go over the system requirements, but it covers how to launch BMS with VR, and of course, it includes a description of the options within the config file that specifically affect VR performance. There's also an entire section devoted to fixed foveated rendering, which is a huge performance saver in VR. Now, these guides are updated with every release, but I did notice one small thing here, which was not true in my case, and that is that this OpenXR Toolkit is no longer supported or compatible with the current iteration of Falcon BMS. So, although it is true that OpenXR Toolkit support stopped in 2024, it works just fine in Falcon BMS right now. However, without that support and ongoing maintenance, it is possible that it may cease to be compatible with Falcon BMS at some point in the future. At least for now, if you'd like to monitor your performance in real time and take advantage of performance-enhancing features such as fixed foveated rendering, you can definitely use OpenXR Toolkit for that purpose. Speaking of performance-enhancing features and OpenXR, let's talk about the settings in the game's launcher. Now, for the best possible performance in VR, I would recommend running this in OpenXR if your headset supports it. There are a few other options within the game's launcher, so we're going to go over those briefly. Starting with this theater dropdown, where you can select a theater if you have other theaters installed. You can open the documentation with this button here. And finally, we're going to disable this Export RTT Textures option, as it is only useful if you're using an external MFD, which would not be the case if we're running this game in VR. Now, another very useful third-party tool is this Weapon Delivery Planner. So if you don't have this, I highly recommend downloading and installing it, as not only is it useful in helping you configure and set up your data cartridge, but it is an absolute must-have if you want to update your kneeboard pages on your pilot so you can see them in game. So if you don't have this, definitely download and install it and get this up and running in your Falcon BMS installation. Now, if all you thought you'd have to do to get VR up and running in Falcon BMS was just turn on a few in-game settings and adjust a few settings in the game's launcher, you'd be sorely mistaken. Where the actual configuration happens are in these CFG files found in the game's installation directory. So there are two of them that we're going to be referencing here in this part of the video. Now, before you start changing any settings here or anything in your CFG files, please make sure to read the game documentation, which I covered earlier in this video. So there are some useful technical manuals, PDFs that were included by the devs, which detail exactly what each of these settings do. So we're going to go ahead and open these CFG files. We're going to start with this first one here, which is the Falcon BMS CFG file, and the second one here, which is Falcon BMS User.CFG file. And where you find these is in your games installation folder under User Config. So opening this first one here, Falcon BMS Config, we can see that there's a big warning message here. So breaking down the difference between these two config files, this first one is the main config file, and this defines all the parameters that are loaded up when the game is launched. This has all of the default parameters that are set by the game, and so hence this warning that any modifications you do here are just going to be overwritten whenever the game is updated. So if you'd like to define any custom parameters, that is what this Falcon BMS User.CFG file is for. So on my Falcon BMS CFG file, I have the default settings selected, and all my custom VR settings and custom CFG settings are on this Falcon BMS User.CFG file. So here on this Falcon BMS User.CFG file, you can add your specific configuration lines below this commented out description. So the first line that I've added is just a comment to describe what each section does. So to add those, just add a double slash at the beginning of the line to indicate that it's a comment. And you can also use this to turn on or off any of your custom parameters. So we can see here that initially I tried these four parameters you see here, and I wound up turning them off with a double comment. So the only active one here is this one right here that doesn't have a comment. Next we have the HOTAS and key sections, so I just turned this on to make an audible click when I'm engaging Afterburner. And then the only VR setting I have here is just this right here, which in order to enable OpenXR, we're going to need to set this to 2. So turning this on to 2 will enable OpenXR in Falcon BMS, and I'm just going to go ahead and save that so we can start up in VR next time we launch the game. Now down here, I had some existing settings here in my User.CFG file. I'm not sure where these came from. These may have been a carryover from an alternative launcher that I installed for 4.37, but I went ahead and just left them in here because I'm not sure yet what exactly they do. And so that covers the config files for Falcon BMS. And now we're going to take a minute here to go over the settings that I have configured in the NVIDIA app for Falcon BMS. So just to show the driver and software versions that I'm using right now. So I'm on NVIDIA driver 591.86. And the NVIDIA app version I'm using is this version right here. So to configure the graphics settings for Falcon BMS, we're going to go over here to Graphics, and then add the program manually using these 3 dots. Select Add a Program, and then select Falcon BMS EXE. So here we can see the NVIDIA driver settings that I'm currently using. So right now DLSS is not supported by Falcon BMS. I have this turned off. I have image scaling turned off in the NVIDIA driver, as that is enabled in the PimaxPlay app. For monitor technology, I have fixed refresh selected, as G-Sync is not supported by VR at this time. Power management mode, maximum performance. And then for vertical sync, I'm just using the 3D app setting, as that is managed by the frame rate of the headset. I also have the max frame rate turned off, as again the headset's refresh rate is what manages the max frame rate in this case. And then for legacy settings, I have the negative LOD bias configured to clamp, and that's just to enable some better image quality when anisotropic filtering is enabled. And that covers the NVIDIA app settings that I'm using. Now let's go over the settings that I'm using in PimaxPlay. So I'm currently on version 1.43.7, and you can check for the latest updates by clicking on this Check for Updates button. We're going to navigate over to My Assets, and this is where you can add the game to the My Applications tab. So to do that, click this Import button. Browse to your games folder, and then select Launcher.exe. And the game will appear in My Applications as Launcher. Now, it's not going to show this custom icon that I have enabled, so to get the custom icon, what you can do is browse to your Pimax client folder under this location, under C, Users, your username, App Data, Roaming, Pimax client, and then edit this config.json file in a notepad. So in the config.json file, scroll down until you find the entry for launcher, and then just paste in this URL that you see here, and this is just a link to the Falcon 4.0 picture that you see here from the Steam store page. So once you have pasted that line and then saved the config.json file, you will then see this custom image instead of a generic game image. Now let's see what settings we have for Falcon BMS. So to configure the settings, we're going to go over here to the Pimax Crystal Super, and then select Device Settings. So here you can see the headset firmware and controller firmware versions. To update them, just click on the update buttons, and the launcher will automatically check for updates. Moving down here to room lighting frequency, I have this configured to auto. My refresh rate is set to 72 for a stutter-free gaming experience. Now, when you are first benchmarking, I recommend using a 90 Hz refresh rate so that you can ensure your FPS is consistently above 72. And once you've set consistent frames above 72, then just bump this down to 72 for a stutter-free gaming experience. Now, 5090 users can probably max this out, as the card is faster than a 5080. Moving down here, we have the screen timeout and brightness settings, so this will just be your preference. You are going to want eye tracking enabled in order to use foveated rendering and the eye tracking that comes with it in OpenXR Toolkit. The wearing location reminder is useful to ensure that you are wearing the headsets correctly and getting the best possible image in VR. Next, we have the IPD adjustment setting, so this will be dependent on your IPD, so you can have an optometrist measure it for you, or you can measure it yourself and then just enter in your target IPD. Let's go over to the Advanced tab. So here we have the Advanced settings. You can configure offsets. You can configure the dimming setting. You are going to want pass-through so that you can see your keyboard if you need to press any keys while you're in VR. The chaperone setting is optional, as if you're going to be remaining seated for most of the time, you won't be walking outside of the VR boundary. Let's have a look at the general settings. So here we have the OpenXR runtime, currently selected as Pimax OpenXR. If Steam VR is your default OpenXR runtime, you'll see an option here to set it back to Pimax OpenXR. You can toggle this option on to listen to the headset's audio, but since I'm using over-the-ear earphones, I don't use the audio on the Pimax headset. You can turn the home off with this setting here, and there's a couple of more options here for troubleshooting and exporting a log to diagnose problems. Let's have a look at the settings I'm using in Falcon BMS. So we're going to navigate to the Games tab here and change this drop down over here to Launcher. So Launcher is the name of the executable that we access Falcon BMS through. So after selecting Launcher, tick this Enable Program Setting box. I have the FOV on Normal, image quality on Auto. You can definitely customize it for higher image quality, but it will cause a decrease in performance the higher that this bar is set, so I leave this on Auto. Next, we have GPU upscaling. So because Falcon BMS does not support DLSS, I am using GPU upscaling in order to increase the performance. So we're going to click on Settings here, and these are the upscaling options that I'm currently using. For NVIDIA users, NAS will work the best. For AMD, you can use FSR. You can use a preset for the GPU upscaling or define your own, which I have done here. So currently I'm on 1.3 super resolution with 0.3 sharpness. And since I'm using the sharpness setting here, I'm not using the sharpness setting in the NVIDIA app. If you use any kind of GPU upscaling, the sharpness setting over here is going to be grayed out. Now here we have the PimaxPlay dynamic foveated rendering and central priority rendering options. Now unfortunately I could not get these to work in Falcon BMS, so I have them turned off as I'm using OpenXR Toolkit for the dynamic foveated rendering. Now, Smart Smoothing is a newer option for PimaxPlay, and essentially what this does is it helps stabilize your frame rate by using frame interpolation. So what I noticed that it did in my case is instead of running at 90 frames per second, the game halved the frame rate to 45, and although it was technically running at 45, it did not feel like it was running at 45 because of that frame rate interpolation. So this just helps stabilize frames. I leave it turned off as it uses a predictive algorithm, and so during fast motion there's a little bit of bending here and there on objects, and also there were a few little graphical artifacts in Falcon BMS, and I'm not sure if it's just the game or if it's the smart smoothing setting itself, but I wound up just turning this off. And if you can stabilize your frame rate above your preferred refresh rate, you don't need this smart smoothing setting to be turned on. Next we have the lock to half frame rate setting. So this is effectively a VSync setting, and so it basically just prevents screen tearing, but this isn't necessary in VR, and it will lower your frame rate if you turn it on. You are going to want the hidden area mask setting to be turned on to increase performance, and then I have Vive compatibility turned off, followed by these color options, which I have left on default. Now to start the game, I recommend clicking the start button from the actual settings menu instead of starting it through the My Assets tab. It doesn't always apply your custom GPU upscaling settings if you start from the My Assets tab, so to make sure that it does apply your settings, I recommend using this start button. And that covers all of the settings I have in the PimaxPlay app. Alright, so now we're going to take a moment here to go over the in-game settings that I'm using in Falcon BMS 4.38.1. So to get to the in-game graphics settings, we're going to click on the Setup item in the left navigation menu, and then select the Graphics tab. And so here we can see all of the in-game graphics settings, which affect both 2D and VR. We're going to start up here on the top right corner with the window mode, which I currently have set to borderless, followed by selecting the graphics adapter, which is the RTX 5080. And here we can choose an output monitor, so I have my primary monitor selected, followed by the resolution and the refresh rate, which I have maxed out at 1440p 144 Hz. Now this resolution and output only affects the 2D resolution or the 2D mirror on the desktop. This does not affect VR performance or quality in any way because the resolution is determined by the headset. So once we have this configured here, we can move on to anti-aliasing, which I currently have set to 1, and quality set to 0. Now there's no discernible effect on the quality when changing this from 1 to 8. However, regardless, I would recommend turning off the anti-aliasing because the anti-aliasing implemented into Falcon BMS 4.38.1 is multi-sample anti-aliasing, which has a huge impact on VR performance, so it is not worth using anti-aliasing in VR in BMS. So I would recommend just leaving the anti-aliasing turned off and taking advantage of the high output resolution of the Pimax Crystal Super. Now, over here on the left, you can see the video memory. I'm not sure where this number is coming from because I have 96 gigabytes of system RAM and 16 gigabytes of video RAM on my RTX 5080, so I'm really not sure where that number is being pulled from, but it's of no consequence, so we're going to move on to the next group of settings here. And so here we have the vertical sync setting and the triple buffering setting. Now these two settings are tied together, especially in 2D. Normally you'll turn on triple buffering to assist with vertical sync, but I'd recommend turning both of them off in VR, as they are not needed because the frame rate is limited by the headset's refresh rate instead. So we don't need vertical sync in VR. Moving on to the next two settings here, we have the pilot model and the draw mirrors setting. You can turn these off to save a little bit of performance, but I would recommend leaving them on for immersion. For the season setting, we can set this to weather controlled with the dynamic weather engine or pick a season. I recommend leaving this on weather controlled, so that way the weather engine will control the type of weather that you fly in. We have one last group of settings down here, so I have the object detail maxed out all the way, followed by the HDR bloom and blur setting, and I would recommend not turning this up too high as it can cause some visual artifacts in VR, so definitely don't go too aggressive on the bloom as it will cost performance and it can cause artifacts in VR if turned up too high. So definitely not essential to max it for VR. Moving on, we have the tree setting, which I have maxed out, and the grass density on medium to balance performance and quality. And that covers the in-game graphics settings. And we'll take a moment to go over my OpenXR Toolkit settings, so I have that pulled up here for you to see. The overlay is set to advanced to give us additional detail in performance monitoring. Target frame rate is set to 90, but doesn't affect the FPS, just the calculations of the overlay. Upscaling is turned off because that is enabled in PimaxPlay, but for those curious, we could switch this on to NIS, and you can see that effectively I'm running the game in 3136 by 3310. Moving down, we have Foveated rendering, and I have a custom preset, so this is how I have it set up in OpenXR Toolkit. We have eye tracking turned on, and this is working in Falcon BMS. The cull outer mask cam setting is set to yes, followed by the inner resolution set to 1 time, so the inner ring is rendering at full resolution. The inner ring size is 55%. The middle resolution is 1/8, with the outer ring size being 75%. Outer resolution set to 1/16. Prefer resolution set to vertical. Horizontal scale 125%, and the offset at -25%, but this will vary depending on where your eyes sit in the headset, so you may need to adjust this. Vertical offset set to 0%, left to right bias set to none, the experimental turbo mode turned to off, frame rate throttling off, record statistics no, high rate statistics no, and then finally we can exit the menu. Once you have your settings configured, I recommend testing them in a benchmark, and the BMS devs have included a built-in benchmark into the game. So to find that benchmark, select Tactical Engagement in left navigation menu, and come over here to Saved, and then select this TE BMS 00 benchmark test. And there's a small description of what this is, so it showcases the heavy water effects and object effects. So this is a great way to test the worst case scenario in terms of your VR performance. So once you select commit, you can just go ahead and take off like you would for any other sortie, and running the mission, you'll be able to test your VR performance. So this is how I tested mine. And so now running this benchmark, here we are sitting on the runway, and this benchmark tests the worst case scenario with the new water effects in the sim, and so I would recommend running this benchmark to make sure that your settings are acceptable. And as we get going here down the runway, you'll see that the frame rate starts to climb up a little bit. So we go from 75 up to 79, and then as we get airborne up to about 85, and then topping out at 91. So the lowest performance instances are going to be when you are close to the ground with a lot of objects loaded in, but once you're in the air, the performance does get better. And so that is why I would recommend lowering your headset's refresh rate to 72, so you get the game running stable above 72 frames per second, and then cap the frame rate in the headset to 72 to avoid any stutters that can occur from those minor frame rate fluctuations depending on what's going on around you in the sim. So definitely give this benchmark a try once you have set up all of these settings that we have gone over to make sure that your performance is going to be stable and acceptable for ongoing use. In conclusion, these settings should result in about 72 FPS in most situations when running Falcon BMS 4.38.1 in VR. Keep in mind that your performance may vary if your hardware is different from mine, so you may need to tweak these settings on your own and find out what works best on your setup. Additionally, there are going to be some situations where the performance can drop, especially when there is a lot of AI activity happening at once in the dynamic campaign. Additionally, game updates and driver updates can change performance, so please make sure to follow any updates from NVIDIA and benchmark sims as features are added. Final thoughts. My hope for this game is that the developers find a way to implement DLSS at some point in the future, as this would be effective at increasing both VR performance and quality. Unfortunately, I am not aware of any plans to add this, so maybe we will see DLSS in Falcon 5 when the project comes to fruition. I hope you found this guide helpful, and if there's anything else I should have mentioned, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Finally, if you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you would like to support my channel directly, consider signing up as a member for early access to my videos and other perks. If you'd like to purchase a Pimax Crystal Light or Super, please consider using my affiliate link and discount code in the video description. Thanks again for watching. See you in the virtual skies.